If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
And if people are getting promoted, supported, and they are demonstrating a certain behavior or culture, then everyone else around them has to assume that that is what the organization wants and is what is going to be rewarded.
When we praise someone, fund them, protect them, give them special access, or repeatedly make exceptions for them, we're telling everyone this is what success looks like here. Welcome to Science Leadership, where we explore leadership both practically and scientifically. What makes great leadership? Why these things matter, and how we can do them well. Those are the questions we wrestle with through thoughtful discussions and real-world stories. I'm Tom Collins, and I'm joined by my friend and co-host, Justin Hamrick. Justin, today we're continuing our 5-part series on one of the most difficult leadership challenges, what to do with highly productive, selfish people. In the first episode of the series, we asked whether someone who produces exceptional individual results should truly be considered a high performer if their behavior reduces the productivity of everyone around them. Today, we want to examine what happens when an organization does more than tolerate that person. What happens when it promotes them, not necessarily by giving them a higher position, but by endorsing them, protecting them, directing resources toward them, giving them greater visibility, and repeatedly making exceptions for them. That support may help the person produce some things very quickly, but what does it do to the organization's ability to accomplish larger, more important, and more enduring things over time? At the heart of this episode is an adage that I've often heard. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So let's get into it.
I've been thinking about this idea of the selfish high performer, what we talked about, the difficult high performer. And someone who has come to mind is Barry Bonds.
Barry. Yeah, I think Bonds is a great example for what we're discussing today.
For those listeners who may not know much about Major League Baseball, Barry Bonds is probably the best, if not one of the most extraordinary baseball players ever to play the game. He won 7 most valuable player awards, more than any other player in Major League Baseball history. He became the all-time leader in career home runs, beating my childhood hero, Hank Aaron, and set the single season record by hitting 73 home runs in 2001. At his peak, he was so dangerous that opposing managers regularly chose to walk him rather than allow him to hit. They would just pitch around him. They're like, we're not going to let this guy beat him. And they would just not even let him hit. They would intentionally put him on base. In 2004 alone, Bonds was intentionally walked 120 times. Pitchers and managers changed their entire approach to the game on where he was batting simply because he was coming to the plate. Bonds brought enormous value to the San Francisco Giants. He'd played previously with the Pirates, but when he was with the Giants, he attracted more attention, filled the seats, broke records, and helped make the team a perennial contender for the championship. But Barry Bonds did not operate like an ordinary member of the team. By the early 2000s, he occupied 4 lockers in the Giants clubhouse. He had his own television and leather recliner. He had a personal staff and entourage with unusual access to the clubhouse. He was permitted to miss some team routines and received accommodations unavailable to any other player. Those privileges reflected more than an organization trying to help a talented player at his best. They reflected the selfishness and the organizational tolerance of it. No one requires 4 lockers, a private recliner, personalized territory, and a separate set of expectations merely to play excellent baseball. There were other players at the same time excelling that didn't have this. Bond's talent, production, and importance had become reasons for giving him more space, more freedom, more protection, and a different rules and standards than the rest of the team. And the Giants accepted that bargain because Barry Bonds produced at a level almost no one else could match.
Justin, that's a great overview of some of the story of Barry Bonds, and it gives us a very clear picture of this leadership dilemma we're talking about here today. The Giants were not investing in an illusion. Barry Bonds really was extraordinary. The team could point to the home runs, the awards, the ticket sales, the victories, and say, this is why we tolerate everything else. But the privileges also sent a message to every other person in the clubhouse. They said that one player's individual production was more important than others, and it was enough to allow him to be separated from the team and exempt him from the expectations that applied to everyone else.
Exactly right. The Giants gave Barry Bonds the opportunity to reach extraordinary individual milestones, but even Barry Bonds could not win a World Series by himself.
Exactly. And that leads us to the question we want to explore today. When we disproportionately endorse and resource a selfish high performer, are we helping the organization accomplish something larger, or are we just helping one person produce more?
So let's get to the part in this episode where we get to, with all the beginnings of our episodes, the what. What are we talking about today? So let's begin with what we mean by promoting the selfish high performer. Not just supporting, but promoting, tolerating. We're not necessarily talking about giving someone a new title or placing them in a formal leadership position. So what are we talking about?
Yeah, in this conversation, we're using promote in the broader sense of amplifying the person. An organization promotes someone when it gives them more visibility, praise, funding, staffing, space, opportunities, all these sorts of things. It may direct the best people toward the individual's projects. It may grant exceptions that are unavailable to others. It may protect the person from criticism or accountability because leaders feel that they may lose what that person brings to the table. Through all this, the individual becomes increasingly central to the organization. At first, that may appear entirely rational. If someone produces more, why not give them additional resources? If they can move quickly, why not clear obstacles from their path? If they're the star, why not build around them? The problem is that resources do more than increase output. They amplify the person's way of operating. When an organization gives additional support to a generous and collaborative high performer, that's not who we're talking about today, that investment may help them share knowledge, develop other people, build programs, create opportunities that extend beyond themselves and their ambitions. When the same support's given to the selfish high performer, that often leads to that person consuming even more resources, controlling the opportunities, avoiding accountability, and operating independently of the group.
And the organization may believe it is simply rewarding performance when it is actually endorsing an organizational standard or ethos. Like there's tolerance of a standard, and then there is promotion of it. And if people are getting promoted, supported, and they are demonstrating a certain behavior or culture, then everyone else around them has to assume that that is what the organization wants and is what is going to be rewarded. It is telling everyone that what matters most is what the individual produces and not how they produce it, not their effect on everyone else. It is also suggesting that teamwork, reciprocity, and shared expectations become much less important when someone's numbers are high enough.
That's a critical point because endorsement is never neutral. When we praise someone, fund them, protect them, give them special access, or repeatedly make exceptions for them, we're not merely recognizing past success. We're telling everyone in the organization, this is what we really value. This is what earns resources and protection. This is what success looks like here.
Yeah, and everyone else sees that. They don't care what you say. They care about your actions. And if the actions say that, then they're naturally going to adjust their own behavior accordingly. I mean, you want people who want to succeed, and they are like, well, the organization says this, but this is what they're rewarding. And if this is what they're rewarding and I want to succeed, then I've got to do that. We talked about on the first part of this, the ripple effects of that behavior. Yeah. This is one of them, right?
Right. And the way that people adjust when they do see that, when they do see what's rewarded, it isn't helpful. It's corrosive. And that's terrible for collaboration and morale. So in this, the organization may increase the star's output while reducing the willingness of everyone else to contribute. The organization is actually undermining their own success in a real sense. Let me pause from our conversation to ask you, the listener, a question. Are you ready to turn leadership principles into daily practice? Are you ready to become the leader you're capable of being? If so, my new book, The 4 Stars of Leadership Development Guide, is specifically designed to help you do that. You'll get a 12-week program designed to help you strengthen your character, competence, caring, and communication. Each chapter comes with focused reflection, illustrative stories that bring the concepts to life, and concrete actions you can apply immediately. No matter where you are in your leadership journey, it's a resource that is guaranteed to help you. You can find it online at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and essentially all outlets where you get your books. Get your copy today and begin becoming the leader you're capable of being. Now let's get back to this interesting conversation.
This is where the difference between going fast and going far becomes important. One person may be able to move quickly toward a narrow objective and a fairly close objective, particularly if everyone else is expected to accommodate them. But most meaningful organizational goals require many people contributing different forms of expertise over a much longer period of time. It's the thought between, okay, we want to win the next game versus we want to become a dynasty. We want to become the standard for whatever organization that we are.
Yeah, as you're talking, I'm just thinking about the Apollo mission to the moon, right? Like, you could have had the best person in the world. If Neil Armstrong was the best, most capable, we wouldn't have gone to the moon. It required this enormous organization, everybody working toward putting someone on the moon and returning them to Earth safely. That was the goal, and everybody had to work together. So back to our analogy with Barry Bonds. I mean, Bonds could hit a baseball farther than almost anyone who ever lived. But as we were talking about Terrell Owens in the last episode, he couldn't throw the ball to himself. Bonds couldn't pitch 9 innings. He couldn't field every position. He couldn't manage the bullpen, or if he was on base, he couldn't drive himself home. He could help a team win, but he could not replace the team. And that same principle applies in whatever professional or other setting that you're finding yourself, whether it's business or science or education. Any field of human endeavor, that applies. Excellent medical care requires teams. Important scientific work requires teams. Strong organizations require people who can share information, coordinate decisions, combine their abilities. Even the most gifted individual is limited by what one person can do, know, see, hear, etc. So when an organization concentrates all this attention and resource toward one selfish high performer, it may increase the speed at which that person is producing, but it, at the same time, creates this significant risk of weakening the cooperation required to accomplish anything that exceeds that one individual's capabilities. And this gets to the adage I mentioned earlier, which, fascinatingly enough, I was in one of my PhD courses this past year, and I thought this was an adage that everybody had heard. And so I mentioned it, and my professor, who's a leadership expert, was like, "Oh, I've never heard that." I'll write that down. But again, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Now, that isn't to be interpreted literally. I can just hear somebody out there saying, well, an individual can run a marathon alone. That's not what we're saying, okay? Probably not listening to the right podcast if that's what you're coming away with. The point is that the bigger, more complex, more meaningful, more enduring objectives aren't accomplished by individuals. They're accomplished and sustained by groups of people working together, by teams.
Now we sort of leads us into our next part of our episodes, which is the so what. We sort of defined what we're talking about, sort of promotion, what happens when promoting the difficult high performer. Let's get into the so what. We've established that supporting and really promoting, not only just supporting, not just tolerating, but supporting, promoting a selfish high performer can help that person accomplish something quickly. But why is that such a problem if the measured results are positive?
Because rapid individual production and meaningful organizational progress are often not the same thing. A selfish high performer may generate revenue and publish important work. They may complete a highly visible project even. The benefit is immediate. We talked about that last time. You can measure it. It's easy to identify. But the cost, again, back to our first episode, is slower. It's spread out. It's harder to identify because it's among a bunch of people. As the organization directs more resources and opportunities toward that selfish high performer, it can become increasingly dependent on that individual. People start thinking, oh, we can't take Bonds out of the rotation because he produces, etc. Knowledge, relationships, resources, authority, all these things begin concentrating around this selfish high performer. And then that person becomes, in a real sense, indispensable, partly because the organization has spent years making them indispensable.
Barry Bonds is a good example of that. There was almost nothing an opposing team could do to make him an ordinary hitter. He could change a game when he came up to the plate. He could carry an offense for stretches of a season. He drew fans, he drew attention, and with that, revenue. And the Giants had an entirely rational reasons to build around his ability. But there was a negative side to organizing so much around one person. The more the Giants accommodated and promoted Bonds, the more separate he became from the team. Those 4 lockers, the recliner, the personal staff, and the exceptions reinforced the idea that the normal rules of the clubhouse did not apply to him. They really sort of did that, we're going to sacrifice tomorrow for today. And that sort of thing changes what everyone else understands about an organization. The other players see that one person receive more space, more freedom, more protection. They also see that the privileges are tied to individual production rather than contribution to the team. It really establishes the culture And that sort of culture is almost always a major negative. It really disrupts the locker room.
That is a major danger. Major danger.
Major danger. Major danger.
Yeah.
I think I knew of a guy in the military.
It sounds
whose
like
name
something
was
from the movie
Major Danger.
Airplane, you
Yeah.
know?
Roger.
Right. Don't call me Shirley. No, I was just thinking, you had said there, sacrifice tomorrow for today, and that is, I mean, there's so many leadership things poor leadership things that people do that's exactly what they're doing. They put off this difficult conversation, this making this change, setting the standard, showing up, doing whatever it is, because they're sacrificing tomorrow for the convenience of today or the performance of today.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we're doing that, when we are endorsing these people, that causes that cultural corrosion, because it spreads. People see it, they start acting accordingly. That's deadly. And it's reinforcing. It's this negative reinforcing cycle that once you get into it, man, that's hard. It's hard to get out of. The more the organization accommodates or promotes that selfish high performer, the more they begin to believe they can't challenge him because they're afraid to lose him. The organization doesn't realize that they cannot afford to lose him because it repeatedly invested in him instead of developing everyone else in the group. I mean, organizations, at the end of the day, organizations are to blame for this because people either show up with these issues, the selfishness and so forth, or they've seen it play out and that it gets rewarded by the organization. And so either you chose poorly on the front end or you have endorsed it and brought it out of people. So either way, that's an organizational issue.
I mean, it's an interesting cycle, right? The star receives more because the star produces more. Then the star produces more partly because they receive the best opportunities and resources. The growing performance gap is used to justify even more investment, right? Meanwhile, the people around them begin to withdraw, which makes the gap even bigger. They may still do their jobs, but they stop offering ideas, taking risks, mentoring others, or contributing to projects when they believe the favored person will receive the credit, because they're like, why am I doing these things to help the team if that's not what the team values? And by the team values, meaning that's what's not getting rewarded.
Yeah. I mean, it's that quiet quitting that we hit on in the last episode. The organization sees one person producing more while failing to notice that everyone else may be contributing less.
Exactly. And as you sort of alluded to earlier and on the previous episode, the effect eventually becomes cultural. Every investment, every exception teaches people what the organization values. It's not what you say, it's what you do. When leaders repeatedly reward a selfish high performer, others learn that visible individual output matters more than sharing, reciprocity, and contribution to the group. And that doesn't end well. It doesn't matter what you put on the vision statement or what you've got above the locker room wall. Those sayings don't matter. How the organization and the leaders act is what is telling people what the standard actually is. It's no different than my kids. I could say I want them to finish the meal I provided, but if they pout and whine and then I give them chicken nuggets, they'll understand what the standard and expectations actually are.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's like sir and ma'am. Our kids have told friends, we're a sir and ma'am house. And that was really a weird thing for kids out in California. But if the kids are going to say sir and ma'am, then you've got to enforce that standard, because if you don't, they won't at the end of the day. Right. And this is so vitally important. I mean, so vitally important, not the sir and ma'am, but what you reward and what you expect is what you will get. The most meaningful organizational goals they're too complex for one person to accomplish alone. So everybody's got to be working in this thing together. And if you have created an environment that is rewarding individual productivity and undermining, let's say, collaborative effort and the collective productivity, you will never accomplish those meaningful, complex objectives. You'll only accomplish these relatively unimaginative, perhaps, or minimally impactful things.
Yeah. Like you may have the most technically talented surgeon in the world. That one physician may be extraordinary, but that physician cannot build and sustain an excellent clinical program or hospital alone. They have to have an excellent preoperative team, an excellent ICU recovery team, an excellent rehab team. Like they have
I
to
noticed you haven't
have,
said anything about anesthesia.
well, that's obviously at the top. Like one investigator can have a brilliant idea, can have the best science, but the most important science, production, discoveries still depend on collaborators, expertise outside of their realm, staff, participants, institutions, and years of coordinated work. One person may produce extraordinary results, but the collective effort is what always allows an organization to accomplish something larger and sustain it over time. And that's one of the things as we've been talking about this, I think most people, if they step back, most organizations would be like, what do you really want? And it's not that they want to be successful tomorrow, is they want to be an organization of change that is looked back on as someone who changed the game. And those are dynasties. Like the teams in every sport that sort of are looked at as the standard are ones that sustained excellence over time. And that gets to really what you're talking about here is not that you had one great sales day, you had one good game, you had one good patient outcome. It's that you made a team and an organization that was able to sustain excellence and growth over a very long period of time.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's fundamentally the measure of great organizations. A great organization wasn't just here for a year. Didn't just discover one thing or make one, contribution necessarily. It's something more substantive than that. Justin, do you have, and I know you must, do you have a good story from your own experience that really showcases this issue well of the selfish high performer and these things that we're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, having been in medicine, I've come across different physicians because of either seniority or national or worldwide notoriety that were able to get away with things. Poor behavior was just looked at as that's just who they are. The things that we sort of talked about. And it really was detrimental to the team. Like the team operated in, let's just don't mess it up, operated in fear, all the things that we sort of talked about, the ripple effects. And no one lives forever. And when those people left, what they left, their legacy was a team in ruins that was not trained, not organized to create whatever success they have longer term. And we see that in sports all the time. Like dynasties are made, like the New England Patriots, of different players coming in, different receivers coming in, different running backs, and they sustain excellence over a long period of time. And you see these other ones that bring in a superstar, they cater to that superstar, the superstar retires or leaves or gets hurt. And what is left is you're like, oh my gosh, this is just terrible.
Yeah.
So those are the two examples I sort of had.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen the same thing over and over in medicine where you have this one person and they either bring in a lot of revenue because of a certain skill set they have, clinically, or somebody who's got a number of big grants, have brought notoriety because of that, published a lot of papers, but they just leave people in their wake and create a toxic environment, really. I think a question we should always be asking ourselves is will this investment in this person, this selfish high performer, will it move the organization toward being more capable and able to accomplish its goals? That if it doesn't improve the collective, I'll say this as a rhetorical, is it a worthwhile endeavor to bring this person in?
Yeah. Is the squeeze worth the juice? Is this worth the cost it's going to have to the organization and the team? Let's get to the science. Let's get to the the crux of our podcast. What does the science tell us about this, the promotion or support of the difficult high performer?
There are numerous studies on the effect of individual stars on collective performance. I'll touch briefly on three. The first study examined whether star performers can take their success with them when they leave an organization. Boris Groysberg and his colleagues studied highly ranked security analysts who changed firms. This is a classic study, okay? Classic study in leadership landscape. But they found that the analysts' performance generally declined. I mean, these were the top performers, but they declined after moving to another organization, often remained lower for several years if it ever got back up to the point that it was at their previous organization. And that decline was greatest when stars moved alone or joined firms with weaker organizational capabilities. Stars who moved with members of their teams or joined stronger organizations did not experience the same sustained decline. Now, that study did not examine selfishness, and securities analysts are not directly comparable to athletes, musicians, physicians, or other business people. But this study does challenge the idea that a star's success belongs entirely to the star. Often, what appears to be individual brilliance may actually reflect the people, the relationships, the information, the resources, the systems that are surrounding that person.
So the star may be exceptional, but the organization may contribute far more to that exceptional performance than either the star or the organization recognizes.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Now, when we look at the second study, Anita Woolley and her colleagues investigated what makes groups perform well. They studied almost 700 people working in small groups on a variety of tasks, and they found evidence of what they called a collective intelligence factor. That's groups that performed well on one type of task also tended to perform well on others. And what's especially relevant to our discussion is that group performance was not strongly related to either the average intelligence or the highest intelligence of the people in the group. Instead, performance was more closely associated with members' social sensitivity and with more equal participation in the group's conversations. The study doesn't suggest that individual ability is unimportant. Groups still need knowledgeable and capable people, but having one extraordinary person isn't enough. The group has to have the ability to hear from different members and recognize what others are seeing and combine those contributions effectively. This is actually some work that informs some exercises that are often done in leadership development programs where you get groups of people together and you give them a sort of survival scenario that they've got to work as a group to come up with an answer, and they choose it individually, set that aside, and then collectively they do it. And almost always, not always, but almost always, the collective answer is much better than the answer from any individual.
In other words, a team doesn't become exceptional simply because it contains an exceptional individual. It becomes exceptional when its members can use their ability together. I mean, this is, God, how many examples are there from sports of you look at them on paper and you're like, oh my gosh, there's a team full of superstars. And then when they get on the field, they can't use that ability together. And they've got one of the worst records in the league.
Yeah, what was it, Dream Team 2 that got beat in the Olympics, because they had all these superstars that couldn't work together? Yeah. The third study, in that study, they examined what can happen to employees working in the shadow of a star. Jinyi Zhao and her colleagues conducted 4 studies, including 2 field surveys and 2 experiments, and they found that the employees most adversely affected by stars were sometimes not the weakest performers, but rather those whose performance was relatively close to that star. That is, those who were almost right there at the same level. Pretty high performers in and of themselves. Those employees were more likely to compare themselves with the star, and that comparison was associated with some negative effects. Specifically, those people developed greater psychological entitlement, more counterproductive behavior, and lower well-being. The effects were stronger when the team's work was highly interdependent. Now, let me be careful not to overstate the findings of this study, because they didn't examine selfish stars either, and it does not show that supporting a high performer inevitably harms colleagues. However, it does demonstrate that stars affect an organization through more than their own output. Their status, their visibility, they shape how peers interpret fairness, recognition, and where they're standing within the group.
So the organization may believe it is rewarding and supporting one person while also changing how everyone else sees the workplace and their place in it.
Right. And when we take these studies together, they suggest 3 things. First, star performance often depends heavily on the people and organization surrounding the individual. The environment is as important as the high performer's abilities. Hear that, folks. Second, collective performance depends on how effectively people combine their abilities, not simply on whether one person is extraordinary. And finally, concentrating attention and status around a star can negatively affect the motivation, behavior, and well-being of capable colleagues. The question is not whether an extraordinary person deserves support. It's whether supporting that person strengthens the organization or leaves everyone else working in the star's shadow.
Those studies really get us to what we need to talk. Well, what do we do now? Now we know what we're talking about, but what do we do? So let's make this practical, because the first study you mentioned really suggests that the organization and the organizational structure is really tied to even high performers' performance. And to do that right will produce results that are incomparable to a poor organizational structure. So how do we do this right? How do we support high performers? But how do we not support difficult high performers inappropriately and make those ripple effects which undermine and destroy the rest of the organization?
Yeah, good question. On the last episode, our first step was a reframe. And so a little bit of the same thing here. The first step is to reframe how we're looking at things. Instead of focusing on what that high performer may accomplish if we give them more resources, we need to ask, again, this was at the end of the last episode, what will this investment make possible for everyone else? Will the person use the additional staff or the funding or whatever it is we're going to give them to strengthen the work of the group? Will they build up other people? Will the organization become more capable by doing this? Or are they just going to concentrate the resources to themselves? A collaborative high performer, which is what we want, they're going to use that additional support to build something that a lot of people can contribute to and benefit from, whereas that selfish high performer is probably going to use the same thing to expand their own control, their own status, their own independence. So what's going to be the outcome? We need to think about that as a first step.
Yeah, so leaders need to evaluate more than the projected return from the individual. And for this, we're talking about the high performer. They also need to consider what the investment in that high performer or any individual will do to the surrounding organization and team members.
Right. And the second step is to attach expectations to the support. And we kind of hit on this a little bit last episode. Too often, organizations just give resources to a high performer without defining any expected outcomes, not setting responsibility beyond simply, quote, producing more. The person receives additional staff, they get more funding, they're protected, and the only expectation is that their individual numbers continue to rise. But institutional support should carry an institutional obligation. The leader might say, we're investing in your work because we believe it can advance the organization's mission. Part of that responsibility is helping others grow, contribute, be developed. We need you to share what you learn. We need you to build something that does not depend entirely on you. That doesn't diminish the individual performer's achievement. I mean, if anything, it elevates it. But it places that achievement in a context, and that context is in the organization, helping the organization be better, helping the organization to achieve its goals.
I think the expectations also need to be concrete. It can't be, like we said in the last episode, be a better team player. Otherwise, the person can continue producing individually while everyone assumes they're also strengthening the group.
Yeah, that happens so often. And to prevent it, leaders have to be looking for, and mentioned this in the last episode, observable evidence of impact. Are other people gaining opportunities, becoming more capable? Does the person give appropriate credit? Man, have I seen some credit hogs in my time. Can the work continue when that person is absent? As a leader, if you're building a system that depends on one person, where there's one point of failure, you've done a bad job. Let me just say that, okay? I'm just going to just set that right out there on the table. You got to be thinking about developing the depth of your organization, the people that you're leading. Are they getting better? Or is every important decision and relationship becoming increasingly dependent on this one person, your star, as it were?
Yeah, the real test in all of this is whether or not the organization becomes stronger. And in every sense of the word, not the one person, like not their one individual production, but is the organization and all its team members, is the tide lifting all boats?
That may be the clearest test of all. If the investment is working well, that organization should become less dependent on any single person over time. But if each new investment makes the organization beholden to or reliant on one person, then that apparent growth may actually be increasing its vulnerability. And that brings us back to Barry Bonds. The Giants had every reason to support an extraordinary player. No question. The problem wasn't they invested in greatness. The problem was they catered to their selfish high performer, and they separated Bonds from the team. They allowed individual production to exempt him from shared expectations. He was seen as better than everybody else. Leaders should support extraordinary people. Don't mishear me, but that support should never compromise your mission. It should never make your people feel less than. It should never corrode your culture. It has to be building the whole group. Justin, as we close here, the question that I would ask leaders to consider is this. When you direct additional resources, opportunities, time, influence toward a high performer, does that investment make your organization stronger, or does it simply make the organization more dependent on that person?
Yeah, I think that question forces us to look beyond the immediate return. When you're putting the resources there, you're telling everyone on the team, everyone in the organization and outside of the organization, what you value. And does that align with your values and goals? The person may produce more. That does matter. Don't mishear us on this. Like, high performers should be supported. But leaders also have to consider whether the investment develops other people, strengthens cooperation, distributes knowledge, and leaves the organization more capable of continuing the work over time. This is what we talked about. Do you want to go fast or do you want to go far? The best investment in an individual person should create benefits that extend beyond that person.
Exactly. The selfish high performer often presents leaders with an attractive short-term bargain. Give the person more resources, more freedom, and they may produce more, and they may produce it quickly. But leadership requires us to consider more than the immediate return. We have to ask what our support teaches the organization, how it affects the contribution of other people, and whether it develops collective strength or deepens dependence on one individual. Extraordinary people deserve support, but the best high performers do not use that support only to advance themselves. They convert it into opportunities and knowledge and capability for everybody around them. In the next episode of this series, we'll examine what happens culturally when organizations repeatedly reward selfish high performers. The message may be more powerful than any formal statement of values. What you reward is what you produce. Thanks for joining us on this episode of The Science of Leadership. We hope today's discussion gave you practical tools and a deeper understanding of how you can be a better leader starting today. Remember, leadership is about helping those we lead do great things. It's a journey of continual growth and learning. When we embrace that journey with curiosity, courage, and humility, we can confront challenges, overcome barriers, and foster environments where everyone can succeed. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow or subscribe. Leave a comment, share the episode with others who are passionate about leadership. Until next week, keep leading with character, competence, caring, and communication. This is Tom Collins. Let's keep growing.